It's nice to see everybody here for the first seminar, I believe, for Wednesday morning. Just a little bit of background. My name is Dale Kempster, and I am the Technical Director for Schluter Systems Canada. About 50% of my responsibility is working with the different industry associations in the tile and stone industry. So consequently, I represent Canada for ISO, International Standards Organization. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be entertaining a working group meeting for ISO in our facility in Montreal, Canada, in the end of June, where we have over 45 delegates from all around the world that are coming to work on the different standards that we're trying to develop for the tile industry internationally. I also am the chairman or chairperson, to be politically correct, of the TTMAC Specifications and Research Committee. And we create the actual manual that is used for specifications in Canada called the 093,000 manual. We do have a booth here, so if you like to get a copy or at least find out how you can get a copy, I recommend that you go by and see Violetta from the TTMAC. My topic today is to deal with tile, the natural choice. There's a bit of a theme here because, or a meaning to the natural choice, because tile is basically made of natural products. It's a very environmentally friendly product, and it's something that I don't think everybody understands the actual nuances of tile and stone tile especially, but also there's obviously slabs that are being used. And I'm going to talk about how they're green, the sustainability aspect, which a lot of it may not be something that you're aware of. And we'll talk a little bit about LEED and how we can contribute with the tile industry. But just to start off with, if you wondered how long tile has been around, it's been around for a real long time. It goes back to the pyramids. It's the oldest surface finishing or floor finishing that is known to man. So it goes back to the pyramids. If you've ever had the experience, and I actually have had the experience because of ISO meetings, to go to Xi'an in China, and they have the famous terracotta warriors, and the floor, all the floor there is tile, terracotta tile, that goes before Christ. This is the famous Il Duomo in Florence, Italy. And if you go in there, you will see this is actually the work of Michelangelo. And the sarcophagus of Michelangelo actually is in this cathedral. And these floors are absolutely impeccable. The only thing you may see is a little bit of a divot in the floor between the pews, where people over, literally hundreds of years have been going up and down and have worn a little bit of a path. But otherwise, the floors are absolutely stunning. And this picture here, this goes back to the Fortress of Nazareth and in Jerusalem. And this floor is a mosaic tile that was actually installed in a very old technique. It's called the sand bed method. And back in those days, there was no Portland cement. So they had to use some type of binder to try and hold the sand together to also adhere the tile. And back in those days, if you go back to the Romans, one of the things that they used as a binding agent was something that we've all eat for breakfast: white eggs. So I guess they had a lot of fowl back then, but they would use white eggs, or in some cases, there was actually a senator who wrote a alarming article or letter indicating that he was alarmed by how much red wine was being used in construction, because that was another binder that they would use, because Portland cement wasn't actually discovered till 1807. And Portland actually derives its name from an island off of England, which is called Portland, and the rocks that are on Portland are the same color as what Portland cement is, so this is why they called it Portland for Portland cement. But if you look, I mean, this is incredible that this floor, which has gone through battles and earthquakes and everything else, it's still in relatively decent shape. Then to look at modern day, and I've been in the industry for 30 years, and it's just remarkable. I remember the first show I ever went to in Italy, in Cersei, and back then, you know, all there was porcelain was just starting to come into the marketplace. A large format tile was basically a 30 by 30 or a 12 by 12 tile. There wasn't a lot of unique designs and colors and what have you. And then over the years, in the last 20 years or so, it's just been incredible how fast the industry has grown. So if you look here on this particular photo, the ceiling being done here, this is with what's now called, the original name was porcelain slabs, which to me was contradictory because these tiles are actually very thin. This particular tile here, I believe, is only 5 millimeter, which is less than 1/4 of an inch in thickness. And these tiles now are being made in just absolutely huge dimensions now. I think the largest one currently is somewhere like 1.3 meters by 3.2 meters, and it doesn't seem to stop. They can continue to grow. Now, there is a new standard that has come out for these larger form tiles. It's called 108.19, and this new standard basically calls out that these tiles are now to be called gauge porcelain or porcelain tile panels or slabs. And the reason why they went to gauged was because now that these very large tiles, if you can believe it or not, are also being made thicker, even though the original desire was to make them thin so they're easy to handle and lighter for transport and what have you. But now they've come up with half-inch or 12.5 millimeter thicknesses, which are being used not really for being on the floor. I'd hate to be the installer trying to install something that heavy and difficult to maneuver. But the reality is that they're using it for countertops, for office executive tables, for doing doors, all types of different applications where they're actually cutting it down to size. But you know, this is a phenomenon now that we're seeing is a lot of these tiles are coming to North America. It mostly originates from Italy. There's now there was only 1 or 2 manufacturers. Now there's several manufacturers that make these large format tiles, to use something a little bit more generic as far as terminology. Here you can see a car showroom being done where they've used the larger form porcelain panels. And there you can see that if you look at the picture there, that particular tile there on the left is again over 3 meters tall. Probably it looks like it's only about 1 meter wide. I've been to showrooms or at the Cersei show in Italy where again they've got tile now even larger than that. So, tile versus other flooring options, and this is something that may not be obvious or intuitive, but the thing that you really should be aware of is that, you know, tile is one of the most natural products that you can have. We're basically using, you know, the minerals and materials that are in the ground, and then we're baking them at such a high heat that there's no way any bacteria, no mold, what have you, is able to resist being basically evaporated when the tile is being made. And so as far as natural product, you can't get much better than tile. If you look at all the other materials that we're dealing with, when you have carpet or vinyl or engineered wood, things of this nature, a lot of times you're dealing with materials that have chemicals in it that are not natural. One of the things that tile gets away with, and also stone, unless it's got some type of sealer on it, is that it's automatically determined to be VOC free. Okay, that means there's no volatile organic compounds. We don't have to have it tested. So that alone is pretty big. If you look right now, I'm sure most of you are familiar with, I think one of the most strongest standards out there for health is CHIPS. And the way they've been going is that they're asking that you have minimal VOCs, but now the trend is going to no VOCs. So if you look at a lot of the products that are out there, a lot of them will be listed, look at carpet or vinyl, that there is minimal VOCs, but they're not completely without VOCs, which tile does have. It's inert. It has no VOCs at all. And this has become more and more prevalent. We get a lot of calls. I've actually had people for our company. We make membranes that are made out of polyethylene and polystyrene and other materials, where they've asked me to send a sample so they could actually sniff it and see whether they had an allergic reaction. And I was pretty dumbfounded, because the reality is that in the case of a membrane, it doesn't matter whose it is, it's encapsulated. It's going to be bonded typically with some type of mortar in some cases, maybe an adhesive, and hopefully the adhesive doesn't have any VOCs or very low VOCs. But then you put the mortar and tile on top, and so basically the product is encapsulated. So the concern there, I thought, was a little probably overreaction, but that's how bad it's become. It's not something to play around with. Some people have some very, very sensitive allergies, and so having no VOCs is a huge benefit. Another thing too with tile, which again should be pretty self-evident, is that it's non-flammable. So in construction, it can give you that safety aspect. That again, I've had calls where they've asked me, well, what type of flame resistance does your membrane have? And I said, well, it's kind of a ridiculous question, because the product is encapsulated to the point where the only way that it could actually burn would be if you were burning through a slab, to the concrete slab, or through the whole floor of a wood frame construction. Before it finally would possibly ignite. And the reality is that if you've gotten to that point, you better be out of that facility or house, because it's probably in a pretty bad condition with the flames. So that's another benefit that we have. Another thing I didn't list in here is the beauty of tile and stone is that slip resistance. That's surprisingly enough, one of the number one injuries in both households and in commercial establishments is slip and fall. And in the United States, and this was a real eye-awakening, there's actually more people that are killed by slip and falls than car accidents. I mean, think about that. It was mind-boggling when I saw that. But and really what it points to is the elderly. When the elderly slip and fall and they break a hip or what have you, there's a very good possibility they're not going to make it through. So in the case of stone and tile, what we've actually established is a new test method that's about 3 years old that's called dynamic coefficient of friction. And it is underneath ANSI 137.1. And basically, it calls out that for wet areas or dry areas, but typically dry is not such a challenge, that you need to have equal or greater than a 0.42 dynamic coefficient of friction. So again, another safety aspect, which, some of the materials that we compete against don't have that luxury. We can pretty well almost make any type of slip resistance number you want, except that you don't want to go too high where you're actually sticking to the floor and possibly tripping. Now, this is a publication that I recommend highly for you to take a look at. It's actually in the Tile Council of North America's handbook. I sit on this handbook committee representing the Canadian Tile Trials and Marble Association. And within this book, they actually have several inclusions of different documentation. And the one here for the tile, the natural choice, is excellent because it does tell you all the benefits and features of tile for its sustainability and the whole gambit of the production of tile. And basically what they've called out that is in North America, there's two ways that they basically look for green. One is the performance rating, which is based on, for the environment, for social and economic and sustainability. And then transparency, because the problem you have is, a company can manufacture a product and produce data sheets on their product, and they could pretty well, obviously you hate to hear this, but they could put a lot of information there that may not be actually accurate. Now there's transparency in that you can have a third party come in and evaluate everything that is being proclaimed by the manufacturer to prove that it actually is true, that it is something that is accurate. To give you another example, too, is, for instance, in the Tile Council of North America, they actually have, for porcelain tile, an actual service called the Porcelain Verification Program. And the problem is that porcelain typically is classified by its porosity. It typically needs to be at least 0.5% water absorption or less. And there was tile coming in from different countries that were called porcelain. And then, lo and behold, when they were tested, possibly because there was problems, maybe some cases the grout was not coming off when it was grouted, they found out that in reality they were not porcelain, that they were actually having water absorption well above 0.5, in some cases even 1% or even more. So transparency has become a huge aspect when it comes to green. And the sustainability aspect is very important as well. And the reality is that with tile, they've actually come to the point where they can make a tile, and I'm sure it's not coming to market anytime soon, but there's a show in Spain that's held every 2 years called Qualicer. And I was there last year, and it's basically the who's who of the tile industry, and there's a lot of scientific papers there. And there was a group there that now can produce a tile that is made out of 100% recycled material. Not all post-consumer, but still all 100% recycled material. So tile has come a long way. It used to be in the day that recycled content, you were lucky if you were able to get maybe 5 or 10% recycled material. Now we're getting up into 30, 40% recycled materials. So as far as sustainability, the other aspect is that the longevity. I mean, you can't get much better than what was in the shots of the pyramid, but the reality is that LEED indicates that for tile that it has a 60-year life cycle. 60-year. And that really is being conservative. We have tile today that you can go to and see, in Montreal, you'll see cathedrals, the Église Notre Dame, and that, where you'll see tile that's been down now for a couple hundred years. There's many places in the United States, but if you really want to see old tile, go to Europe And you'll see, tiles that are literally hundreds and hundreds of years old that still are in perfect, pristine condition. So the tile industry recently came out back in 2012 with a standard called ANSI A138.1, which is called green squared. And green squared has automatically been accepted by many different green codes and associations in North America. And this was produced by a group of manufacturers that wanted to make it simple for tile and tile-related products to be specified and used for LEED and for chips and what have you. So the reality is that this certification has led actually to making a couple of different things. This is just talking about transparency, the differences between one type of design versus another design. But what actually came from the involvement of these different manufacturers was the recognition and need to make EPDs. Now, for most of you, hopefully an EPD is not new. Okay, that's an environmental product declaration. As you can see on the right-hand side, the label there, it almost looks reminiscent of what you would see on a pop can or a box of cereal. And really what it is showing is all the key aspects that are important for people to make a educated decision on the material that they want to use in the construction of their building or their home or what have you. So if you look at the different aspects of the EPD, they're looking at global warming. They're looking at, I'm sorry, I got to take my glasses off here. Fossil resource depletion, acidification, smog formation, eutrophication, and ozone depletion, and many more. There's many other things that are evaluated. And the reality is that, again, transparent reporting. I was involved with the EPD that was created for mortar and for grout. And I can tell you, it is incredible the amount of information that you have to submit to be evaluated by a third party. There's different groups out there in the United States. There's UL, or another one is NSF, the Standards. Sanitary National. Oh God, I got a brain lock here. I'm sorry. SNF is one, and then in Canada there is CSA. Is being used as a third party. As a matter of fact, they just publicized in a blog that they just had their very first EPD that they created and certified for Portland Cement Association in Canada back in April of 2016. So, and there's probably maybe a couple other third parties that you can utilize when you're doing your EPD. Again, it's basically an evaluation of everything. And when we do an EPD, it's really from cradle to grave. So from the very manufacturing of the product to when it's finally finished and it's going to be disposed of, and how it's going to be disposed, and what it has as consequences to the environment when it's disposed. The reality is that we have two types of EPDs. One is a generic one, which is typically a combination of different manufacturers going together to create this EPDs, and they basically have the third party not only for transparency, but also so they can keep their data obviously secret from their competitors. Otherwise, no one's going to do it. No one wants to know how efficient another manufacturer, well, they like to know, but they want to keep it secret on how efficient they are in producing their product, and any information on pollutants and things of that nature that may make them look less favorable than the next competitor. It makes it really important to make sure you have a third party. But the beauty is that when you create a generic EPD, then it's easy to make a proprietary EPD. And so what you'll find is that in the tile industry, for mortar and for grout, there are several manufacturers that have both. They'll have both a generic, because they participated. They had contributed to the financing of the generic EPD. And then they went on their own and had their own proprietary EPD made, and you'll see in a second why that's important, so that they can get more points and also prove, in many cases, that they're actually more efficient or have a better number than what you're actually getting with the generic. And this becomes important with the EPDs. I'll just go through this slide here. These are the 3 EPDs that are available. And just to give you some numbers, we basically, in North America, when they evaluated the grout and mortar, they're looking at over 2.25 billion kilograms of grout and mortar that was evaluated in that evaluation. And as far as tile goes, we're looking at 325,000 square meters, or 3.35 billion square feet of tile were evaluated in 1 year to come up with these numbers for the EPD. Now, I'm just showing one. There's about 10 different graphs similar to this, but this is basically showing you the amount of CO2 that is produced by these different materials within 1 square meter, from basically cradle to grave. So it's taken into the manufacturing, transport, the actual installation, because there may be materials involved in the installation that have to be taken into account, and then the actual disposal. So again, right from the beginning to the end. And if you notice, the lowest one is tile. So per square meter, we're looking at 15.1 kilograms of CO2 through the whole lifespan. So that, don't get this misunderstood that it's the manufacturing side. It's everything put into that equation. And throughout the EPD, they evaluate all types of different concerns for the environment and sustainability, acid rain, for instance, and things of that nature. So this is what the label looks like that you will see for the EPDs, for tile, mortar, and grout. And what you will find is that they're always consistent. So if a tile manufacturer has their own proprietary EPD, it's going to look the same as this. They want to be able to make it so that you can compare apples with apples. And the same with the mortars and same with the grouts. So again, you want to have certified performance, and by having these labels, we have transparencies. Just like when we go to the grocery store, and you take a look and see what the content is on a loaf of bread or a box of cereal, what have you. This is more or less what they've tried to do as well, is to make it as transparent as possible so the consumer knows exactly what they're getting when they decide on an educated decision on what they want to use in their construction. Green squared is actually recognized by LEED now. It is in LEED 4. And again, this is where the point system comes in, and where if you look at the way it's been evaluated, and I have to read this off because I didn't memorize it by heart here, but 25% by cost of permanently installed building products are third-party certified to be approved for U.S. GBC, or it would be the CA GBC in Canada, for sustainability standard. It is specifically listed by the U.S. GBC and the CA GBC. Certified products must also have a life cycle assessment, and that's again, where my understanding of LEED 4, where the big difference is from talking to a few people, for instance, one of the participants in the development of LEED and also our standards for our 093,000 manual was a gentleman called Keith Robinson out of Dialogue, an architectural firm out of Edmonton. And I had contacted him prior to this presentation to ask him, it led me to think about, well, we need to look about revising our 093,000 manual. It was done in between for 2015 to 2017, and the information we had on LEED is actually now old. It's not up to date. And so he indicated that, yes, we will have to make an addendum and add the new information on LEED so that everybody's aware, again, of what the contribution potentially can be with tile. Sure. I'm sorry? Well, this is leading to the general aspect, basically 25% by cost of the installed product. Then you can get that 1 point, and if it's already green certified, square green certified, then there's really no issue. They know they're able to get that point. But there is also the building product disclosure and optimization for EPDs. This is where it gets a little different. They use 20 different products which have an EPD, and you get another point. Again, it must have an LCA, which is, again, life cycle analysis. It must and it must have a product-wide EPD, which means, again, the generic EPD. And then if it has a product-specific EPD, it's valued at 1 as well. And 50% of the products have LCA life cycle analysis impacts lower than the industry average. You get 1 additional point. And to be fair, it's a little complicated. And if you go to the website of Tile Council of America, which is tileusa.com, they have the full LEED breakdown, so you can see exactly the calculation, because there's even more to it. There's other points that you can gain. Some of the things I'm not even covering, for instance, is you can also for health, internal health. I mean, tile does not use any type of chemicals for cleaning and what have you. You can just use water and soap to clean it. Another big thing is for radiant heat. Radiant heat is becoming, especially geothermal, is something that gives you a lot of points in LEED construction. I'll show you my case study, an example of that. But if you want to see all the full points for tile in LEED, if you go to tileusa.com, they've got the actual documentation there so that you can make the calculations. Other things that, this is largely United States, but the International Green Construction Code recognizes the EPDs that come from Green Squared. ASHRAE is another one. The Green Globes for new construction. Also NAHB, the National Green Building Standard. Also the EPA it actually recognizes it. And as well, another one I didn't put on here, and I forget what the acronym is for it, but you can basically, for all federal government jobs, if you have green squared, and this includes military and what have you, automatically be included within the considerations of the materials because of having that certification. So this is a case study. This is a building that was constructed about 6 years ago in Montreal. It's a regional distribution center and training center. And there was a lot of different attributes that were put into this. And one of the biggest ones, of course, was tile. It was, for new construction, it received a gold. It could have probably got a platinum, but as I go through it, I'll tell you why it didn't. And there was a lot of innovative achievements that were done in the construction of this particular building, which some of it would not have been able to be done if it wasn't for the use of tile and stone. There is absolutely no emissions out of this building. There's no manufacturing whatsoever. It is completely heated by geothermal. And the use of tile, we had over, in this particular building, 5,574 square meters of tile that was used both inside and outside. Some things you can see from here that were important, again, for LEED was that we used a white roof, a white PVC roof, which not only does it give you less of a heat sink. You know, here's a statistic. If all the buildings in New York City had white roofs instead of black roofs, they would reduce the heat in the summertime by over 10 degrees Fahrenheit because it's such a heat sink. And it really, and also the other big thing is sustainability. A white roof will last way longer than a black roof. The minimum lifespan for this particular roof is 20 years. Black roofs, you're typically going to almost be half. So the other aspect was all the natural vegetation was left, and a lot of green space was utilized. So when we went through, and this is the odor LEED, and gone through all the different things that we qualified for, basically it came to 47 points, which got us to the gold level for new construction. Now that's changed. This is the latest checklist from LEED 4, and now you can be looking at a higher amount required now to get to gold and LEED status, going from gold or to platinum. The numbers have risen, so again, they're getting more complicated and a little bit more demanding so that you can get the different statuses. This building has a tremendous amount of lighting, being all natural light coming through into the atrium on both sides, and this that's north, and then the backside would be south. So a tremendous amount of light was coming into the main area. Then on the wall, you can just see the beginning of construction. They have a green wall. And again, with LEED, the other thing you have to be careful about is not to contaminate the ground. So we had, in this particular building, there was tarps being put down to make sure that the trucks, if they were leaking oil or transmission fluid and things of that nature, that it was captured, it wouldn't contaminate the soil. If it was found to be contaminated, you had to excavate that area and get that material taken out and disposed or cleaned. If you're in construction, you need to tarp off the work area so that you don't have the dirt corroding and whatever's been dug up starting to get into the natural environment beside it. These are the pumps that were being, the lines for the pumps for the geothermal construction of this building. And the roof also had, and this is again where some innovation comes in, we put in this warehouse area, these are skylights that have mirrors, and it follows the track of the sun to reflect as much natural light into the warehouse. So in the warehouse on a sunny day, there's no artificial light being needed. We have enough light that comes through these skylights so that we're able to utilize, Mother Nature. Also, a solar wall was created, and this is genius. It's so simple, and why it's not being utilized more, I see very few buildings that are doing this. Another building we were involved with in Reno, we used the solar wall as well, and it was unbelievable. Even though Reno is a relatively hot area, well, at nighttime, and especially in the wintertime, it gets very cool. It gets below freezing. And with the exterior solar wall, it's just natural heat. It's basically like a ventilated facade, and the air gets heated in between and then brought into the building and used to help supplement the radiant heat that was used in the floors for the HVAC in the building itself. There you can see the completed building. And what's interesting as well is another innovation. Well, we had this here is a green wall. Again, a big learning curve. Any of you have been involved with a green wall, it's not what everybody makes out to be. It is a nightmare. Our experience was we had to change the plants 3 times. We also found out the pump would not pump the water high enough to the top portion of the green wall. So the reality is that the plants on the last quarter up the wall were not getting sufficient water and were dying. And then we found out that there was a lot of soil that would fall down into the holding pond, and the dirt actually would plug up the pump, so the pump would break down constantly. So now what you would see right there at the bottom there, where the lily pads are, is now empty and just rocks. And we've now got plants that are being used that need very little water, and we have physically somebody who comes in once every 2 weeks, waters the plants, fertilizes them, picks dead leaves off. And then we found out even with all the light that we had from the north and south, it still wasn't enough for the plants. So we now have an ultraviolet light that basically comes down at nighttime and comes down and lowered all the way to the bottom and back up and down several times to give it extra lighting so it will grow properly. Now, this may look like a sewer, but this actually was, again, very innovative. It's a tunnel that was built. It's about 1 meter wide. It's about 100 feet or 30 meters away from the building, and it's built below the frost line. And so what was done was that we actually were able to take air from outside, and in the summertime, we'd use the tunnel to cool the air as it goes into the building, so that when it goes into our air exchanger that we're not using as much air conditioning as we would normally. And in a wintertime, because you're below frost line, the ground is typically around 57 degrees Fahrenheit, or what's that, about 12, 13 degrees Celsius. And so that warms the air, so we're not starting from scratch. Simple thing to do. As long as you got obviously the area behind to be able to build that, but it makes it so much more efficient. Now this is where the tile side comes in for energy efficiency. Radiant heat was used, as I mentioned. It's all geothermal, and they basically apply the pipe, the hydronic pipe, in typically about a 6-inch to 9-inch spacing. And then on top of that, a mortar material was used. Mortar is basically Portland cement and sand. And they applied that on top to fill in between the pipes. And what that does is it creates a thermal mass. And thermal mass is very important for radiant heat so that you are able to build up heat around the pipes to radiate up through into the finished surface and then into the room. Now, unlike a lot of other materials, tile has no R value. Okay, it actually becomes part of the thermal mass. Same with stone. It doesn't have any thermal resistance. So it actually adds to the whole system so that you've got a really efficient thermal mass that doesn't need a lot of energy. It's a very low heat that's used. The temperature typically being ran is about 90 degrees to get the heat in the room, the ambient temperature to about 21, 23 degrees Celsius or 72, 73. Versus if you're using something like carpet, or if you're using vinyl or LVT, luxury vinyl tile is very popular right now and growing at a phenomenal rate, which to our exasperation in the tile industry we don't like to see. Engineered wood. All these materials have R value, so they make it more difficult for the heat to radiate up through, and it also causes a higher use of energy to be able to heat that space. So as far as an analysis on the energy use, in Montreal, and this is a little dated, it's about 6 years old now, so it's probably gone up a little bit because even in Quebec, where they have probably the cheapest electricity in all of Canada and maybe North America, it has gone up a little bit. But when we took a conventional commercial building, meaning that it was heated by other means than geothermal or radiant heating, per annum, per square foot, you're looking at about $375 to $450 a square foot. When we go to a building that is using geothermal, and what was interesting was that right across the highway from this building was another geothermally heated building by a pet food manufacturer. And they didn't go with tile. They used carpet in areas. They had luxury vinyl tile, things of that nature. And their per square foot was $1.39. And then for this particular building where the modular screed system, which is the mortar bed with the pipe embedded within these panels that are insulated themselves, they create a thermal break, which is also very important for any type of radiant heat. You want to make sure that the slab below, especially if it's on grade or below grade, is not attracting the heat down. A lot of people think that heat only rises. That's not correct. Hot air rises. Heat is drawn to cold. I always use the analogy, remember back in the day when you were a kid and you left the door open or the window and your parents would say, hey, close that door, you're heating up the neighborhood? They were right. All the hot air was chasing out and going after the cold. So the reality is that by using tile, as they did in this building, we're able still to have a significant reduction in the cost of energy down to 80 cents a square foot per annum. Now, again, that may have gone up a little bit, but I'm sure not by much. In the 6 years now that this building was constructed. Now, a question that I get a lot is, well, all those things that you did for that building, how much did that cost? Well, we figured it out to be approximately about $1 million to add all these bells and whistles to try and get the gold LEED. And then the big question is, well, how quickly the savings is going to pay for that? Well, we found out by doing the calculations that within less than 10 years, that extra amount that was expended to be green, to be as sustainable and as environmentally friendly as possible, definitely is well worthwhile. And that's usually where there's a crossing of the ways. A lot of people say, well, you know, this building received all types of awards provincially from the Hydro-Quebec and what have you. And the first thing they said was that normally we don't see private buildings get these awards or even reach that level because it's usually too costly. And the real message is that it's not that costly. If it's done properly, you choose properly, you can make a building that is extremely efficient and meet your goals for green construction and for LEED and to try and get to the level you want. Now, just a little kind of interesting facts is that what we found out to get platinum, we were short a few points, but to get those extra points, it was going to be astronomical amount of extra expense. For instance, for our air exchanger, when we extract air from outside and bring it into the building, we have an extractor that basically is able to retain about 90% of the heat in the wintertime in the extractor and then mix that with the new air, so we're not starting from scratch and extremely efficient. If we wanted to get an extra, I think it was 1 point, to get an exchanger that would be 100% efficient, we were looking at over $100,000 for our building, for this particular building. So it just didn't make sense. We just figured, well, you know, to get that platinum status, to spend that much extra money, then it's starting to get a little nonsense. So it's nice to see that LEED is changing and starting to evaluate things a little bit more so that things of that nature are not silly and you're not wasting money on something that you're not going to get a return on. It's going to take too long to be able to get that return on. So the future is bright, and the reason why I say that is for the industry in North America. Just about 3 weeks, a month ago, there was a trade show in Florida, Orlando, called Coverings, which is probably one of the largest tile shows and stone in North America, and it rivals some of the bigger shows in Europe. At this show, the Tile Council of North America, which is sponsored by, including TTMAC, many of the other industry associations, Marble Institute of America, the National Tile Contractor Association, the Tile Contractor Association of America, which is the union division, and several other associations, kicked off a campaign called Why Tile? And the idea is to try and make it so that the public, as well as architects and designers and that, start to think about tile, and when they see why tile, realize the different attributes that tile offers. So it became live the week of April 4th, and it basically is to give information just very similar to what you've seen today. In some cases, even more elaboration on the health benefits and things of that nature. So that the consumer can now get, again, properly educated. One of the things about the tile industry, and I hate to say it, is that we do a terrible job promoting our industry. If you look on TV or look in newspapers and things of that nature, you see carpet being advertised in luxury vinyl tile and engineered wood, and you'll see commercials, sometimes nationally done. In our industry, we've been very poor. So recognizing that, the Tile Council brought everybody together, and now they have created this website, whytile.com, and it is there for the consumers to go to and get as much information that they can on why they want to utilize tile. They got a lot of pretty unique features. A couple of the pictures I showed you at the beginning, I actually got permission to copy and put into my presentation from their website. They try and really innovate you with ideas of how tile can be utilized. They talk about the different benefits and features. Mold and bacteria resistance, slip and fire resistant surfaces, the low carbon footprint of any flooring choice. I mean, just to give you an example, carpet. If you went to Las Vegas, they used to, not so much today because of cost, but they used to change out the carpet every 6 months. So now think about that. And where do you think it went? You know, they promote recycling. You know how they recycle? I mean, and I'm sure there is some better recycling now, but at one point, recycling was they sent it to a third world country so they could use it. But the reality is, if you are removing carpet, you call up the manufacturer and say, well, we've had this carpet for X amount of years. we know it was this amount of weight. We need to know how much weight that we're going to be having to dispose of for our containers, garbage containers. And they typically will say that there's you can add at least 25% more in weight because of all the contaminants and material, things that have gone into that carpet. Tile, you don't have that issue. It's not, you literally, in most cases, tile, the only reason you change it out is because it's not in fashion anymore. You found something nicer. In reality, in most cases, if it's installed properly, and our industry is getting better and better with that, with training and education, the tile will last as long as you want it. It will last as long as the building. And the other thing about it, too, is, when you think about tile, how often, if you look at a house that's being sold, and do you see them saying, new carpet installed? Maybe you see new carpet, but they're not going to tell you, well, the master bedroom is a beautifully carpeted floor. But they will say, tiled basement, tiled master bedroom, tiled bathrooms, or stone. It adds, literally, equity to the house. You're not going to find that with a lot of the other finishing materials out there. And just to give you an idea of cost, and what I didn't realize till later, because this particular graph is just an excerpt from the Tile, the Natural Choice document in Tile Council. But basically, what they don't show you is the cycle of years. And basically, the ceramic tile install cost per square foot, it's a little higher, but cost per square foot for maintenance is like 33 cents a square foot, and that's based on 50 years. Whereas if you go to laminate, vinyl, and carpet, the cost per year is higher, but also the life cycle on it is only 5 years. So very important that if you're doing an analysis of what finishing material that you're using, that you take that into consideration, because that's all part of sustainability. So this is the new website, Why Tile, and I strongly recommend you take a visit. It's brand new, so it's in its infancy. I'm leaving this weekend to go down to the Tile Council Board of Directors meeting, and part of our meeting is based on is going to be on this topic and what the next steps are on how they're going to develop that website and make it even more user-friendly. The last thing I wanted to bring up is this is the 093,000 manual that is produced every 2 years. This is what I call the Bible for the tile industry in Canada, for tile installation. This is what architects utilize to make their specifications. There is LEED information in there, but unfortunately it is a little dated now. We are going to make an addendum. I'm going to be contacting the gentleman I mentioned earlier, Keith Robinson. He's already volunteered that we'll start looking at making the revisions so that it will be up to date, and we'll have an addendum until the next printing, which will be 2018. We do it every 2 years. This is a voluntary project that is put together every 2 years, and so it's a pretty cumbersome amount of work that's needed to have this produced. So we'll have the next revision for 2018, and the addendums will be available sooner on the website. So that's it. I think I'm almost on time, so I think I have a little bit of time for questions. Yeah? Anybody? Yep. Oh.
There was some discussion on the payback of LEED and the efficiency to buildings. Mm-hmm. What wasn't mentioned, what I learned from the New Building Institute was employee retention, the wow factor of the building, and employee productivity coming back tremendously within a comfortable facility. Yeah.
Excuse me. And that's something that's becoming more prevalent in LEED 4, that they look at the health aspect more now than ever. And that building I showed you the case study on, there's a tremendous amount of glass in all the office areas and all the working areas. And division walls are only at basically just above eye level when you're sitting, so that when you stand, you always got the outside environment, within eye view. So yeah, that's extremely important. The other thing too is that air exchange. This particular building exchanges air 4 times an hour. And when you have a meeting and you're sitting in there all day long, and the air has been constantly, basically revitalized by that exchange, it makes a huge difference. By the end of the day, you're still feeling okay. You're not nodding off and wanting to crawl into bed as soon as you finish work. So yeah, there's a lot of benefits that way. And the other big thing too is more and more people, again, are having health issues with allergies. And like, for instance, myself, I'm extremely allergic to mold and dust. And when you have a hard surface, and I'm not going to mislead you and say that you don't get that benefit with, say, hardwood or engineered wood. But the reality is, with tile, it's one of the most easiest surface to maintain. It doesn't hold dirt, doesn't allow bacteria to grow on it, or mold. So that's why you see, in many cases, either tile or terrazzo being used in operating rooms and things of that nature, because it's so easy to maintain and keep clean.